All across Los Angeles and now across the country, people are asking this question. Who is Don Jackson and what in the world is he trying to prove? Jackson is a Hawthorne, California police sergeant on disability leave, and for the last 15 months, he has videotaped fellow officers on the job in a personal campaign to combat what he believes is the use of excessive force, especially against African Americans and the poor. In late January, Jackson made national television when 2 Long Beach police officers pulled him over for an alleged traffic violation. We will see some dramatic videotape of what happened to Jackson in just a moment. Don Jackson's with us now. Also here is his father, Woodrow Jackson, a retired Los Angeles County Sheriff's deputy. After some reservations, he has come to support his son's crusade. Welcome. It's good to have both of you here.
Thank you.
Since I left that question hanging, let me come right to you, Mr. Jackson. What were the reservations about the campaign? And in the end, why did you decide your father, your son, was right in this crusade?
Well, it took a personal event to really make me realize that the conditions that existed when I started in law enforcement, that was in 1956, were still as bad or as worse. I felt that through community relations training, through better pay, that we had gotten above that status of just hoodlums out there using the badge of authority. When I say that, that is without investigating a situation, policemen with the color of authority, getting people on the ground, handcuffing them. When I handcuffed a man, he had done something serious enough, because I'm taking all of his civil rights away. When I come to that force, I have reached a decision that he has committed a crime, not that he's under suspicion of a crime.
And you think what's going on now is that people are being, what?
Harassed, especially, I would say, surprisingly, much of this happened in the early morning hours of police work. That is when supervision is a little bit less. This is a time that many times we find that the offenders, when I say the police offenders, by just asking, what did I do, can escalate into a violent confrontation.
Tell me about the incident that we have on videotape. What led up to it before we see the footage?
Well, several months of monitoring the police, being engaged very actively in civil rights, I began to see that little could be done without really bringing people irrefutable evidence with regard to police abuse. I tell people, I go to speaking engagements, that the police are acting out of context with the Constitution, that they are doing things that are unlawful and illicit, and people don't want to hear it because they want to believe in the police, and I believe in the police. But there's enough officers out there that just a few of them who are acting out maliciously can cause a significant social problem, and these officers are not being corrected. So what I did was I began to monitor and train people how to monitor the police. I'm trained in surveillance. I worked undercover, and I use my skills in a different way, which is to some police officers dangerous and threatening, but I'm not trying to threaten good cops. Cops that are out there doing their job never have to worry about me, but when they're out there abusing people, I'm going to be there to catch it. And enough times that I've gotten out there, there's been evidence where the police are being illicit and malicious when they contact people.
What happened to you on the night that is in question?
Well, the night that's in question, I drove to Long Beach. We were there probably less than 2 minutes before we were pulled over. We didn't commit any traffic violations. We didn't break any laws. We were pulled over simply, in some contexts, people call it profiling. You have a male black in a vehicle, expensive or inexpensive, and what people assume is that he's committed some crime. There was no crime in this case. We were pulled over. I exited the car, walked to the curb, stood there. The officer engaged me in a verbal confrontation. I simply asked a few questions. He directed me to comply by turning around, putting my hands behind my head, which I did. He took my head, shoved it through the window, took me over to the police car, bashed my head into the front of the car 3 times, took my fingers, bent them back to the middle of my wrist, took me to the back of the police car, slammed my jaw into the trunk, kicked me in the legs, and then took me and threw me in the back of the patrol car. I was then taken to jail.
You're going to see this footage now. It was shot by an NBC News camera crew and by a camera that was mounted in the rear windshield of a car in which Don Jackson was a passenger. This footage is narrated by KNBC television Linda Douglas. As the tape begins, we will see the car in which Mr. Jackson is riding being pulled over by a Long Beach police car.
All right, now the
guys.
Okay, Jackson says he got us.
Right up here, man.
And the Long Beach police officers have pulled Jackson and Hill over to the side of the road. Okay, that's Jackson having gotten out of the passenger side.
Nah, man, what's the deal? Hey, come over here.
For what?
Because I'm telling you to, that's why.
What are you talking about, man? You want to write a ticket, write a ticket. Don't mess with me, man.
Listen, I got the right to pat you down, and I'm going to do that.
Yeah?
I don't know if you got a knife or weapon on you.
You can pat me down, but don't mess with
Turn
me,
around
man.
and put your hands on your head now.
Why?
Do it now. I'm telling you to.
What are you going to do?
Put your hands on your head.
You going to hit me with this stick?
Yeah, I just might.
For what?
Put your hands on your head.
For what? Right
I don't know if you got a knife.
a knife.
Put your hands on your head. Turn around.
Nothing, man, nothing. Nothing, man. I'm all right, okay? No problem.
Get the driver out.
Okay, you can't see them, but you can hear them.
Shut up!
I'm going to break my car off. Break my arm, man.
Slowly step out of the car and back to
We're talking to the driver, Hill. That's Hill now leaning over the car. The officer pats him down.
Good. What the fuck you do? The last thing when you flip the turn. Quiet, aren't you?
Hey, man, you're hurting my back.
That's good.
Tell me what you think's going on there.
What's going on is a beating. I mean, it goes on in the alleys of South Central LA all the time. It's just never captured on film.
The police officer in question reacted that way because?
Well, I understand as a law enforcement officer, police respond to fear with violence very often. That's something that needs to be reduced and eliminated from law enforcement, because out of your fear, that doesn't mean that there's necessarily a threat being posed against you. This officer was somewhat agitated, and he might have had cause for concern with some aspects of this situation. What he didn't have cause for is to brutalize me after I was already detained and handcuffed and under control. And that's what we find. People that run from the police, people that don't do what the police say immediately, even after they're controlled, are subject to all types of brutality, and that's just not in any way consistent with the laws of this land.
And the racial aspect of this is?
Well, the racial aspect is only in that it's more likely that I'd be pulled over and abused. This type of abuse does happen to white people. It does happen to Latinos. It does happen to Asians. It could happen to anyone. Blacks just tend to be more likely subjects of this type of conduct.
Michael Hannon, I know you know this, Michael Hannon, the attorney for the Long Beach Police Officers Association, says that you may actually have pulled Officer Dickey into the plate glass window as he was trying to move away.
Well, this goes into the more creative aspects of the police interpretation of this event. They say he was pulled into the window. If you read Officer Dickey's own report, he says not only that it was he pulled into the window, but that I charged into him with clenched fist, about to strike him in the face, that I cursed him repeatedly, that I refused all of his commands, that I never complied, and I really don't have an answer for that, except to say that this is what police abuse victims so often run into. They face this tremendous credibility gap where their word doesn't mean anything. You can have 11 victims or witnesses stating the same thing, and one officer, and when it goes to court, the officer wins out because people want to believe that the police are always right, and they're not.
Closing of ranks behind.
Oh, absolutely, because when you challenge the police, you're challenging authority. It's like some people think you're challenging apple pie. You know, they believe it's consistent with America that the police and this Clint Eastwood mentality are something that we need, and we don't need that. We need officers that can discern a criminal from a citizen, can discern a threat from a non-threat, and that's not what we're getting right now, and we're paying money for it, but we're not getting the service we deserve.
We'll be right back. Stay with us. When you saw that for the first time, what were your feelings?
I could relate to what happened to him, and this is probably was, at that time, I had quite a change of opinion about what he was doing, because there's a lot of, I worked community relations my last phase of police work, and many people would come in with stories that were hard for me to believe as a police officer. I thought our training was above what some of the stories that were told me. And I felt that they must have done something to agitate, bring about a situation in which this much force had been used. And with my situation, where I was stopped by police, I complied with every directive that was given because I knew the danger, number one. I knew that this was a felony-type pullover, number two. And I had done nothing wrong, so what did I have to worry about?
And yours is interesting because in the van with you were children?
That's right.
And who else?
My grandchildren and my daughter.
And your daughter?
Right.
And you were pulled over?
Under suspicion that I have been involved in a drive-by shooting.
A man in a van with children in the...
About 25-year-old man, black man.
That's what they were looking for. I mean...
They were looking for a 25-year-old black man in a van.
That's
and
right.
You are not 25. And
I could be flattered under other circumstances.
And there were children in the van that you were driving. But they pulled you over and said...
Said that, well, the tone was that we want you to get out of the van and walk backwards to us, which I complied with that. And at that time, there were about 6 officers with guns pointed in our direction. My daughter was screaming that I had a heart condition, which, and was telling them that not to shoot. And they pointed a gun at her and indicated that they were, for her to get back into the van. And she had a baby. She was holding a baby in her arms at that time. The kids were screaming. I told them that this was cowboy and Indian stuff, just to kind of settle them a little bit. I yelled back to them that they were playing cowboy and Indians. But when I was lifted up by the officers by the arms and slammed to the ground and handcuffed, with no other investigation, the fact that I wasn't armed. Normally, I would be armed because as a retired peace officer, but if I had been armed, I may not be here now to tell this.
What do you hope to accomplish?
Well, what I hope to accomplish is to make what for black people a reality in terms of the promises that have been made to them with regard to civil rights. We don't have freedom to travel. We don't have freedom to live where we want to live, shop where we want to shop, and the police are all part of this barrier that we face. I don't want any more rights than anyone else in this country has, but the best thing about this country is that the common citizen, the man at the lowest end of the spectrum, has the rights of the richest people that live in this country, in that we have civil rights and protections that the police are not supposed to cross. But with black people, we're in a crunch. We have the gangs and the violence that live in our community on one end, and we have the police that are trying to get at the gangs and the criminals on the other end, and they're crunching us in the middle. And law-abiding blacks just don't have a chance. You know, and I'm not trying to say that we don't have black crime, we don't have black criminals, but those of us who are conducting ourselves properly and just want to live in this country and try to make it, we face a tremendous threat when we run into the police.
Just so that everybody understands, the tactics that you are using to do this are what?
Well, the tactics that I'm using to do this is through the medium of public exposure. It hasn't been utilized in this way. I don't have the money or the people to make a civil rights movement happen again. But what I do have is the training and the experience and also the support of some media sources to get this story exposed.
So therefore you could contact KNBC television and say, and they knew what you were doing, and so they could bring a camera along as you went through a certain area.
Well, to be honest,
were pulled over.
To be honest with you, even without KNBC, I would do it anyway.
You videotape it yourself?
Well, the first sting operation I did in Westwood, we had a local news crew that was supposed to go. They backed out at the last minute. We filmed it ourselves. It wasn't the best film, but it was such that it shook some people up.
And you say sting operation because what?
Well, that's what it is. You're catching some, if I walk down the street with $20 hanging out of my pocket, knowing that there's thieves in the area and one of them reaches into my pocket and take it,
and you've got a gun under your coat.
And I've got a gun under my coat and a badge, he's been stung.
Right.
And the police are basically, they're not being lured into anything, but if they see me driving down the street and I'm law-abiding, they should not contact me. And if they do contact me and brutalize me, as this officer has, he certainly was stung.
As you know, in the West 57th Street piece, the head of the LAPD said you're doing damage to the police department. And you're damaging those people you want to help, and you're damaging the brave men and women, black and white, and Hispanic, who are part of the police force.
I don't believe in those types of empty excuses. What happened is Daryl Gates is embarrassed, and he will be embarrassed again if his officers abuse people, and I capture it on film. And I'll make sure that the public sees that he is responsible for that misconduct that happens at the lower level of his department.
Did what happened to your dad shake you up?
It shook me up. I've never felt like I felt when he called me up that morning and told me what had happened. It shook me up, but it also inspired me, and it also made me determined. And the retaliation that I've gone through over the past 2 years by police officials and police departments just makes me more firm in my conviction to do what I'm doing.
And you never believed it could happen to you?
No. It was, it's a dramatic shock to your, to your whole psyche, because to have that done, especially in front of your family,
humiliating.
It is.
For you, who'd given your life to police work. Do you worry that he may go too far? Go too far, not in terms of his zeal, but go too far in risking his life?
Yes, I do, because he's still young. He has a lot of experience to gain, and I feel that that experience can be gained by sometime moderating your position. But there are times that he cannot do that because of the resistance of change. We have people who are resisting the changes that has to come.
And I bet you worried that you don't go far enough.
Well, you know, I feel compelled to do what I'm doing, and sometimes I feel like I'm not doing enough. But what I've done, I think, has been successful.
Thank you very much, Don Jackson and Woodrow. Is it Woodrow?
Yes.
That's what I thought. Woodrow Jackson. Thank you both.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Night Watch continues.